his way across the engine, and using a small Lucas shifting spanner he always carried, he undid the top of the fuel pump and bled the air out of it. The car came to life again. The next day, the squadron leader called Dad in and offered him a promotion. He was promoted to leading aircraftsman and given control of the workshop as head fitter. He was moved to the officer quarters and had a manservant called Musa. He never wore a uniform again and did no more driving, which, he's got very fond memories about this. On returning to Birmingham, Dad resumed working at Tommy Johnson's garage in Erdington. Tommy had a passion for veteran, in those days, and vintage vehicles, so Dad was able to develop his interests and skills further. In October 1952, Mum and Dad met on a street corner in Erdington. They were introduced by a mutual friend, Lucy Wright. Is that Lucy White? Lucy Wright? Who thought they were compatible. Mum and Dad were engaged on the 15th of February 1953. They were married on the 15th of August 1953. I was born on the 15th of September 1954. As you can see, the number 15 has featured heavily in their long life together and will appear again. This was the start of over 60 wonderful years of married life. They certainly were compatible and devoted to each other. In early 1953, Dad was promoting the film Genevieve in a 1904 Dirac that Tommy Johnson had got the use of for the process of promoting the film. Unable to get anybody to accompany him on the promotional runs around the various cinemas, Dad persuaded Mum to accompany him. They were treated like film stars as they toured the various cinemas. They also completed in a veteran car rally with the car, and they even stopped for high tea at the Grand Hotel in Stratford. There are some pictures on the slide today of that. Dad's mechanical skills continued to develop while working in the garage. At the same time, he started working on motorbikes outside of work. The first one he actually found. It was buried behind an air raid shelter during one of the many bombing raids on Birmingham and left there following the end of the war. It was, and I've tried to research this, a very early Triumph 25 with exposed valve gear and hand gear change. Dad spent £13.10 shillings on a total restoration, and that was, I couldn't quite read his handwriting, but it's over a week's wages, probably multiple weeks. It became the family's regular means of transport to get to work, but also he'd take Mum on the pillion out to the Lickey Hills County Park, 10 miles outside of Birmingham. Many other bikes followed. After working at the garage for several years, Dad secured a position as a toolmaker in a local business, Bremer Electric, in Small Heath near the BSA factory. In the winter of 1954, Dad obtained a position as toolmaker at Smith's Industries' new facility in Witney in Oxfordshire. The position included a brand new house. Dad lived in a farmhouse outside of Witney for several months while the house was being built. He recently told me that the farmhouse had earthen floors and was lit by paraffin lamps. He travelled to the 3 miles to Smith's each day on a Corgi motorbike, which, for those of you not familiar with it, was used by paratroopers during World War II. Very, very small with high handlebars, and it was a very bitter winter. For this young couple, the opportunity of a new life together in Oxfordshire, they jumped at. Mum followed Dad into Witney on the 15th of February 1955, another 15. Nigel was born in the new house in March of 1957. The family car at the time was an Austin Nippy, not a very good car for 4 children. A larger car was needed, so they purchased a Rover 16 as their family vehicle. Several other cars followed. And I'll apologise to people who are not into cars, but Dad, they permeated his whole life. The first was an Auburn 5.4 straight 8 roadster that did 8 miles to the gallon. He was stopped by the police going up Tower Hill in Witney, allegedly doing 100 miles an hour, just so they could look under the bonnet. A car that followed that was an MGVA, and I found the book. Dad pulled that down and rebuilt it bit by bit, and he's got really very detailed drawings and line by line item of what it costs. So we drove that for many years, went on holidays in the Lake District, all sorts of places. Followed that with a Riley 2.5 RME, and so various other houses, but other cars. In late 57 we moved into a 3-bedroom house that backed onto a farm. This will be our home until 1973. During the 60s we had a Mini Traveller and an 850 Mini Traveller, and we took off to France and Switzerland and Italy in 1967 with a large continental frame tent on the roof. It was crammed to the hilts with food. Nigel and I were sort of wedged on top of everything, and we did a journey of 2,000 miles across Europe for a total cost, and Dad's got this detailed line items, £80 including the ferry fee. The end of we ended up in the south of France, and we were at Lyon, and there was a dreadful storm, so we couldn't camp the night. So Dad drove 21 hours straight to get to Calais. And I remember when he got there, we'd erected a small 2-man tent. We pushed him out of the car, he sort of fell out, and we put him into the tent. So it was an epic journey. Dad worked his way up through several roles at Smiths, ending up as a development engineer, creating new products for Smiths, including heating systems for cars and coaches, if I remember correctly. Acquiring, rebuilding and racing vintage sports cars played a big part in Dad's life throughout the 1960s. After driving a Nash in 1961 that belonged to Jeff St. John, Jeff's engine, Dad decided that he had to have one. Later that year, he acquired the remains of a 1933 Fraser Nash TT replica in St Albans, which he totally rebuilt and restored. He went on to use this car, HAT 777, for many years, racing at Silverstone, Castlecombe, Alton Park and other tracks. He also competed in hill climbs and trials. In 1969, Dad was invited to compete in the Costa della Mandala hill climb in Bologna in Italy. He was unable to use the Nash, as at the last minute it threw a rod before leaving, but he did go on the Nash raid and they enjoyed it immensely. In 1971, boats were added to the mix. My late wife used to say that the Upstons had a disorder called MOT, mode of transport disorder. And Dad, any mode of transport, he would relish and get involved in, from planes to boats to everything. Mum and Dad were planning a round the world trip by yacht, but at the 11th hour Mum decided it was not a wise thing to do. Dad left Smith Industries in 1971 after 16 years to take up a position as development manager at Oxford Controls. He went on then to Oxford Instruments a few years later. They were similar roles to his work at Smiths, but Oxford Instruments including work on the new area of cryogenics. He retired from this career in his late 60s and started his own part-time engineering consultancy. HAT 777 was sold in 1971 to help purchase the house in Hayley. Boats took over from cars for many years. They had boats on the river and they enjoyed sailing around the Greek islands in a friend's yacht. In the 1980s, Dad got back into racing with Nigel. They raced at circuits in the UK, but Dad also raced in France, Ireland and the Isle of Man. They continued to race throughout the 1990s. And Dad, I didn't write this down, but he also, when he finished his racing career, scrutineering was his thing. And when I came in 2010, he was still scrutineering, so he had a long involvement with the VSCC. In the year 2000, they moved to their cottage in Prestine after Mum spotted an advert in the VSCC magazine. I remember Mum always saying she wanted a cottage in Wales. It was a dream come true, but it also included the workshop, so Dad was happy too. Dad restored and rebuilt many cars and motorbikes in that well-equipped workshop over almost 20 years. As a personal reflection on the move to Prestine, Nigel and I both remember sitting on the steps of the Radnorshire Arms as very young children in the early 60s during the annual Welsh trial and seeing such a wide range of vintage cars navigate the challenging hills. These memories of this town go back over 60 years, so it's quite incredible to be here now. You know, as I've spent 44 years in Australia. Yeah, it's quite incredible. Once in Prestine, they also developed an interest in something else with wheels, motorhomes and caravans. Aberavon was their favourite local destination, complete with their beloved Jack Russells. Dad cared for Mum all through her illness in the mid-2000s, and she was able to stay at home until the very end in 2014, as was her wish. To help Dad have a positive focus after Mum's passing, we organised for Dad to come to Australia to meet his 8 grandchildren and 12 great-grandchildren, now 16. He'd already met some of them as we'd been coming across here with our children in the years preceding. It was a glorious 5-week visit. Dad was able to spend time with his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. We had many outings, including the 2014 Australian MotoGP on Phillip Island, where I might add, Dad told me he was as cold as he's ever been in his life, much more than England was in Australia, watching the MotoGP with the winds coming off Antarctica and cutting you to the core. We also went on the Puffing Billy steam train around the hills of Melbourne, a paddle steamer journey on the Murray River at Echuca, and a trip into the depths of a gold mine at Walhalla in Victoria. He also had a flight in a Chinese Air Force twin-seater trainer plane. The pilot let him take the controls at the age of 83. He took the controls of the plane, and the pilot went through a series of aerobatic routines that we've actually got on DVD, and there's some pictures in the slideshow today. He thoroughly enjoyed that. On the 5th of October 2014, we were able to celebrate Dad's 83rd birthday with over 24 direct family members, including 9 next generation Upston males. Great memories. In 2017, Dad moved to a bungalow that he'd found in Warden Close. He'd had a fall up at the cottage in Stapleton, and a move to something more manageable on one level was what he desired. He stopped driving in 2018. This didn't stop him speeding around Prestine. He just did so in a mobility scooter. It only had 2 settings, stop and full speed. And yeah, it was alarming to see him driving. I might also add that I forgot in my notes is he was heavily involved in bikes and electric bikes around Prestine, and many of you would have seen him on biking events here. And push bikes and electric bikes was something that he also, as well as motorbikes, really enjoyed. Dad's last 10 months was spent at St Nicholas House in Churchstoke following a fall at Warden Close in April 2021. He was well liked by the staff, who treated him kindly. Nigel and I, along with our partners Annette and Teresa, were able to visit most days over the last 6 weeks. Teresa and I had the privilege of being with Dad as he passed from this world following a very full 91 years. Something that struck me quite profoundly. Dad was with me when I came into this world, and I was able to be with him when he left it. Your legacy, Dad, lives on in 3 generations of Upstons. God bless you, Dad, and rest in peace. So thank you all for coming today, and if anybody else wants to share any memories, that would be wonderful. I've got a couple from grandchildren, but more than happy if people want to share any memories.
That was very good, thank you. Well done, Michael.
That's all right. I'll just, our daughter Mary, who's 29, she's came over probably 3 or 4 times and saw Grandad. One of my fondest memories is when we were all sitting in the Prestine living room, that's up at Stapleton, enjoying tea while listening to all his clocks chime. How many clocks? We were talking about this earlier, had a lot of clocks. Gran had put on Rod Stewart on the CD, hence the sailing today. And Grandad was asking about what cakes they had in the kitchen for us to nibble on. It was probably something they did every day, but to me it was one of my favourite memories of them. Another beautiful memory is when myself and Philomena, our youngest child, got dressed up to go somewhere. And as we came down the stairs, Grandad said, "Oh, you both look lovely." And he sneakily slid us a £5 note each to spend on something nice. I have too many memories to list, but one fond memory I have to mention is Grandad was driving us to lunch and he zoomed past a field of sheep and yelled out, mint sauce, whilst grinning. And we all laughed while Grand shook her head at him. I'm forever grateful that I got to know Grandad. I'm glad he is now at peace with Gran and probably asking about cake and listening to his clocks chime. Love you, Grandad. And Lawrence, our youngest boy in the family. Staying with Grandad in 2018, my girlfriend and I would wake up each day to a prepared breakfast. At the time, Grandad was in his late 80s and on a walking frame, and yet he got up every day and prepared them breakfast. One night we came back late from the pub, from here, at about 11 p.m. Grandad was still up and he cooked mushy peas from scratch, as I'd mentioned earlier that I enjoyed them. We don't have them in Australia. We all sat down to eat mushy peas with glasses of port. Beautiful memories. Thank you, people. Yeah.